O song celestial. Hello, Bhagavad Gita. Let me see what comes out of me when I read thee. Okay, take a deep breather, because this ain't gonna be easy. This is going to be by far one of the most difficult things to perhaps to explain, but also to accept and to bring together in order to create what we may call a dream, in which we feel like we can manifest. So what if, right? That's the one. What if you could imagine anything and then work hard to bring it into existence? What if you could see life as a chessboard and start seeing the moves that each individual must take in order to progress into a certain kind of future? What if you have done until now everything that you couldn't help doing? We're not talking about you just doing all random kind of things. It's your feeling tells you this is what you have to do. And it doesn't tell it to you once. It doesn't tell it to you twice. It tells it to you until you've done it. But until the message of that's what you have to do, because you've asked about it also, becomes so clear that you simply cannot wiggle out of doing it anymore. So I believe, without ever having read the Bhagavad Gita in its entirety, but having heard it talked about by Ram Dass in his talks, most specifically one talk, which is a series of talks, the yogas of the Bhagavad Gita. You see, it says the yogas, right? So each yoga, I believe, is also its own teaching. Which is why when we say yoga, and everybody thinks of mattresses, and really tight pants that restrict energy flow, in a very negative way, because it highlights your physical appearance. And what yoga is supposed to do is highlight your spiritual, that's actually me. That's the feeling I have inside of me, becoming so clear, you could say pure. But what's pure? It's just, refined. You have filtered out all your netties, right? All your, no, that isn't me. That clearly isn't me, right? That's what netty is for. You look at the world and you start filtering. Because there's so much stuff you cannot know yet what's the real you. So in a sense, you have to lose your so-called innocence, and you have to make experiences in the world you've been born into. And then you make these, and the more you make experiences, the more conscious you may become. But it may also happen to you just like this. But even if it happens just like this, you still have to learn. Because that's life. If you stop learning, then you stop living. And if you stop taking, then you stop giving. So if you want to play an active role in the world you find yourself in, well, then you have to live. And when you live means you have to give, and then there's also taking. So if I don't eat, I do not create then content. So I'm talking to you from the perspective of a man who's tried everything you can imagine to wiggle out of this societal construct. Now, how we can bring this in relation to the Bhagavad Gita, well, we'll see. I haven't read it yet. I know what it's about. I know the basics. But we have to analyze it also under the viewpoint of modern times. We have to analyze it under the viewpoint of modern times. I realized in my life that running away was no longer an option. That there were certain people, mostly people or beings, I wish to keep this perspective. To not see humans as what they like to be, but as souls. So I wish to maintain my position in life, or my perspective in life, that we are all souls. Because if we would recognize ourselves as who we are, then we would never behave the way we do today. I believe that what I have done could be done by anyone. I cannot say if the consequences are just right, because anyone can make a choice against watching movies, but for, let's say, paying attention to himself. What I went through was so heavy that I no longer wanted to be a part of anything. But now I acquired so many important capabilities that I also had to face the decision of, how godly or holy or saintly would I like to be? I clearly realized I do not want to lose my ability to see the flow of energy. So I have to keep meditating. But I also want to contribute to the world. Right? I want to engage with people. So in a way, I want to have an income because I want to be able to also sustain myself. Now, I learned a lot about energy flow, but I had no real form anymore. I was really wiggly. I didn't want to let myself be pinned down. I didn't want to be a part of where I lived anymore, because everybody was so toxic. And I realized a lot of stuff about energy flow and all that voodoo, and I was looking at everything from this observer perspective. But I wasn't really in it anymore. Nobody could grasp me. I found out about planes of energy that are so incredibly hard to access because you'd have to believe they're actually real, and this is something you can only feel. So when I go through a walk at night in the forest, it's all completely different than when I find myself in this city environment. But at the same time, this is what we have to bring together. Because you could say, everything's you. I am a soul, I must be God or something because everything happens to my liking. Well, but it doesn't really. Things happen and you can adapt to it, but it doesn't always have to be to your liking. It may work like this for some time, but I believe in something I call the consequential backlash. You know, you act in a certain way, it's all for me, it's all for me. Okay, fist in the face. You're fat, you don't like yourself, and you spend more time looking in the mirror than, let's say, wondering what you could do next. Or what should I still do because I'm alive and I've got time? What am I doing with it? I'm watching Netflix? I'm listening to the Barbarian, Lunatic, or Christopher, to not give in to the mania too much. Right? You can say, yeah, I'm listening to the Barbarian Lunatic and he's telling me now something about the Bhagavad Gita. Apparently he hasn't started yet. He has hinted on it. He has touched upon it. But he says he's never read it. So now he's gonna read it and try not to get angry at the discontinuity of truth. Because truth isn't this one fixed thing. Truth is a mixture of what happened to you, that's your shadow, and what would you like to happen. But then you gotta bring it back into the middle. What's actually real? You can build, like Gandhi said it, castles in the sky. Yeah, that's dreaming. That's imagining the future. And you can build castles in the sky that are just an escape for what happened to you. So the one is the shadow, the one is the light. You've got the shadow, that's what happened. Okay, how does it affect your life? You're sitting around projecting images into also the present moment. This is possible. You've got a mind. You can project stuff into your mind. But what is real? Well, are there people who can touch you? I believe they're real. Is there a table? That's already manifest. That happened. But now it's there. Okay, the table probably isn't going to haunt you, but your childhood will. Unless you start, step by step, untangling yourself from the mess that you find yourself in. We're not even talking about you created this. No, that's just the riddle you can now start solving. And that's very complicated. I just went through an entire, couple of years of living in the dissociative state. But if you're constantly dissociated, which is what brings us, of course, to the character of Arjuna, which I may hint on now because I'm trying now to relate my own position to you. So I was in the world, I started with psychedelics, I started smoking. I didn't really think anything of it, I just needed distance from myself. I needed to make new experiences. So smoking turns you into smoke, helps you to dissociate, helps you to become like vapor. So you take no responsibility. That's why usually smokers aren't really good caretakers. Because they just smoke. They are vapor. They're not holding planks, they're not solid. And you can usually not rely on them. That's what I figured out. right? And then I let go of alcohol, tried it again later in the game. I started to slackline, but then came all the, how do you wish to call it? Yeah, we call it psychedelics. I believe that you're the psychedelic, and that what funnels your psychedelic experience is not what you take, but what you have. So in the beginning, when you smoke your first joint, it's usually really intense, but it gets less. Why? Because if you have such an experience without building up the energy to have the experience, so let's say you take a psychedelic like truffles, go into the forest and hike. Yeah, super awesome. But afterwards, you won't do it again next week probably. And you cannot do this frequently. These substances that we take, they draw from something we have stored, energy, that's potential. But if we masturbate, or we take things like, let's say, MDMA, they draw from the energy that we wanted, we could have used it to build a life where, let's say, going for a hike is natural. I have made the experience that if I took a psychedelic, that I suddenly knew, okay, then I can go for a hike. But my life wasn't growing. You see what I'm saying? I tried to build myself a life. I wanted to turn the dream that I was having, that I was seeing in my visions from these transcendental states, where I was so high in the sky that I could see so far, my spirit could wander, it could dive into things, it can still do this. But now I have to learn to, when to do it. Because sometimes when you're amongst people, you just have to be yourself. You cannot just continue to dive into people all the time. You have to stay where you are. Until it is time, to let go again and then transcend. Because you can literally try to transcend your family away. You say, hey, go into heaven now, just go into the light now because I want to be free down here. What's ever down here, that's just your concept. In technicality, there is no down here or up there. There's just form and formlessness. So you take form, you're real, people come, they touch you. I have now gone through a time where I said, don't touch me. Because I can feel people's spirits taking a hold of me, trying to control me. You may not get that, but I got it. I have had too many instances where people touched me, and later on I started to cough. So if you go around, you touch lots of people, and in this society everyone's sick. You go around, so it isn't clean. It's not the tribe that lives in the forest, If they touch each other, that's different. But also there, you shouldn't just go around and touch everyone all the time. Because your body is your temple. If everyone else's temple is dirty, well, that's self-responsibility. That's what people here are forgetting. We have to be responsible. But people eat sugar, that's psychedelic. Because what psychedelics often are substances, or because most psychedelics we talk about are highly, how would you wish to call it? They're often everything we have today starts with cannabis. It's all enhanced. It's no longer natural. Sugar is only one thing, but an apple already has other things in it, but it also isn't the way apples used to be in nature. So fruits in nature aren't that sweet. They're a bit more sour. And if you eat leaves, a leaf also contains sugar, but it also contains usually, like birch leaves, bitter. A lot of bitter, where people say, yeah, that's toxic. What's toxic? People here drink Coke. So how can I combine this, awesome vision, free spirit, wandering mind, galactic perspective? How can I combine the crown chakra and the ground chakra? How can I stay grounded and still let go? Well, that's what you have to learn. How can I be darkness and light at the same time? Well, you just have to mix it together. And how does this connect to I have two sides, I have left, I have right? Well, left and right are just words. And this is why the Bhagavad Gita, in its essence, is just a bunch of words. It cannot replace your spiritual training, which includes, and this is something Ram Dass only did, while he was under the guidance of Maharaji, and he told him that's what you have to do this yoga thing now, you have to go wash every morning at 4 or something, you have to go to the river and wash in it. It was ice cold, he said. He did it for some time, but he did not pursue this path further, because the guidance he had wasn't from within, it was from without. Somebody told him that's what you have to do now. Yeah, when that guy fell away, he obviously stopped. So the guidance I have also been craving comes from within. Now what I went through is, okay, I'm gonna tell you, I'm not signed in the city that I live, because I said, I'm not gonna be a part of this system, I'm not gonna be a part of this system, I'm not gonna take part in this. Yeah, but I'm producing content. I said, I don't wanna pay tax, I'm not gonna pay tax, I'm not gonna finance this. Yeah, but I wish to create content. You see what I'm saying, right? So you may not pay tax later, perhaps. But let's say, what if you want to earn money and you wish to buy land? What if your dream meant you have to write books, get a lot of attention, and talk about things that are really hard to understand because you were on the other side? I was living in the shadow. I was literally no longer, participating. I stopped shaking hands. I was alone all the time. I just lived in complete and utter seclusion. And I felt, I had the feeling of myself, I actually wasn't real. I was Dr. Manhattan in the Watchmen movie, which of course originally then was, I believe, a graphic novel. I was Dr. Manhattan. I disintegrated myself. And then I started putting myself back together. But what I felt also was that while I was putting myself back together, things wanted to slip in. Like people wanted to pose like friends, they wanted to slip into my life and control me. So we can do this. Spirits can slip into other spirits and control them from within. And that is just really hard to understand. But if we look at language, there are certain clues. This is the introduction, of course, to O Song Celestial, my reading of the Bhagavad Gita, which will on YouTube come in 18 sessions. But on odyssey.com and on my podcast, it will be released as, well, if it's for my podcast possible, as one single file. Okay. I'm saying that if you see that your wherever you live is in a bad shape, and you start making changes, then you want to make changes. Let's say you want to save land. You know, the reason you earn money is because you love nature, because you also love, let's call them people or beings. You simply want a natural kind of a life. But if I'm always living in the dissociative state, then I cannot associate with anything, and then I cannot be part of the system that, creates this thing. But that means that I cannot go around and tell people, okay, maybe we can do this a bit different. I cannot really advise people if I'm not really concerned for anything. So I can act like, well, it isn't all happening, it's like this or like that. Okay, but I am not alone. I may think it's all me, it's all reflections of myself. Okay, but yourself then is behaving in a very strange way, So the way you feel about life is, all is harmony, all is bliss. But if you leave the house, it's like chainsaws, cars, angry people honking. And you say it's too much, I have to take myself out of this. But if I take myself out of it, I will have to see how it further deteriorates. Because I know I can contribute. And I believe that's the predicament Arjuna was facing. He was asked to take an active part, but he didn't want to. He said, yeah, but why should I? Well, if he would have looked at it long enough, maybe it was necessary. But at the same time, I'm also saying, well, I am fighting. I'm not sure if you get this. This is my way of fighting against ignorance, against sugar. Also, that's the recent thing, kind of against coffee. Because coffee and sugar, also alcohol, they're really sneaky things. And they must be got rid of. So any extract, anything that has too much of just one thing, is imbalanced or going to create an imbalance. Which means that anything of one thing. So if you are too much light, you are not gonna be really alive. And then you're a runaway or a recluse. That's what you choose. It's better for me. Yeah, but what about the world? Maybe the world would need someone like you. That's what I was facing. And I have now made a very difficult decision just yesterday where I said, okay, I think I have to really ground myself. I have to become a part of this community as a real human being. So I have to become corporal. I cannot be always in the sky. I have to be right down here because this is where the stuff is happening that's worrying me. We are turning our land into a desert because we refuse to stop. So I see all of this, but in order to communicate to the people, I have to take form. Which means, apparently, then you live in a world and there's stuff like tax. Okay. I'm not completely convinced that this is what I have to do, but if I want to take an active part in the world, then I believe that I have to accept also the system. To gradually also maybe leave it behind, but then at a later stage, because now I'm 36. And I've come incredibly far by basically constantly living in the dissociative state and building my dream. But I've come to the realization, well, it will continue to be a dream. Because right now I'm in the position I believe I still need to buy things. There are things I need to buy in order for my dream to prosper, because that's how it works today, right? And I need electricity, so I cannot pretend like I'm not contributing because I'm using electricity, so I don't want to run into the forest and leave it all behind. I clearly wish to participate, but if I participate, then the consequence is then you have to be a part of it all. Now, I haven't been signed in this city here, so I am constantly wondering, what am I supposed to do? I felt like a shadow. I'm not really here. And this is really hard for me, because there are so many things we could force on each other. But you also start to worry a lot. You say, well, what can happen? Can they, what can they all do? Well, if you live in this kind of a system and you wish also people to help you, then I believe you have to create spaces for people to join together, but not under the dominion of state rule. And in order to do that, you have to be solid, which is why you have to face the cold as much as the warm. And you have to build up yourself, which means you have to suffer. There's no way out of it. So I chose suffering in the form of nature, but there's also all this emotional stuff going on. Now, before I lose myself in all of this, but I believe it is to be important, so you know where I'm talking from, I have at least decided, yeah, okay, maybe I'm not doing it all by myself, right? And the world is really chaotic at the moment. I create content. I clearly claim service space. So I can see it all as energy and all that. And I want to continue to see it like this because it's simply the most useful perspective. To see it all as, yeah, it's all energy. Yeah, okay, but what do you have to do to manifest? So I see that I want to stay open for giving talks and engaging with people and trying to explain to them these two sides. But if I am too dissociative or dissociated, then it's impossible, because then I won't care. But I want to care. I want to be there. I want to be a father, right? I want to be a husband to my wife. But I cannot be a husband to my wife if I'm like, yeah, I'm already living my dream. I'm already living my dream. Well, my dream is being taken apart by an angry man with chainsaws. Okay, so what do you gotta do? Okay, I have to come down from this really high place. Just go a bit lower, right? And then gradually grow until I feel like, okay, now it's becoming more stable. Okay, but stable from a place of I was really high and transcended. What's that? What's stable after you were basically in the clouds, dreaming, seeking visions, going into topics? That's also in a form letting your spirit go, letting your mind wander, because the mind is a place you can clearly roam. There's like pathways you can walk through. So yeah, you gotta work. If this is my work and I settle on it, then I believe I can take form. There's things that I find distressing, but yeah, do I want to be afraid to leave the house all my life? Or do I wish to confront the outside world and see then what I can add to it, so we can change all together, so that maybe in 100 generations this won't be desert, but maybe people living in an environment that is equally kind of like city, but actually with trees still. So what I am facing and what motivates me to simply take action is that, we have trees and people get annoyed at them and cut them down, or they want to turn them into money. A lot of people in also areas where there's, often you have trees still where people have a bit bigger properties. So middle class, we call it. I believe that's the Brahman, in like Indian prose. Because they understood something about channeling energy and not wasting it all, right? They understood something about building up, about growing, about dreaming. You have to be a bit advanced to get to the middle class by yourself in that sense. Not everyone gets there. And then how do you grow out of this? That's the question. Okay, so in these middle class areas, you often have still a lot of trees standing, but it's property next to property, so it's not super rich. You've got a villa and there's no neighbors anymore. No, it's now property against property against property. And that means there's a lot of bickering. It's like one neighbor wants it like this, the other wants it like that. Okay, what are we gonna do, right? One neighbor says that's it, the other neighbor says that's it. Your tree annoys me. I don't have sun because you see your neighbor has sun, but no, you also want sun. But then there's the tree. You started writing to the neighbor a letter, or you say, can you cut down this tree? The neighbor says, I don't want to. Then you go to a lawyer, then you file a lawsuit. I want this tree gone. Because everybody clings to their little abode. So I said, I'm just gonna go into nature. You see what I'm saying? I said, okay, if I want sun, then I have to leave the house and go into nature. Because I'm living on the shadow side of this building. And I said, okay, I can go into nature. If I want to, I can go into nature. There I've got my sun. So I don't understand this. People cling to this home that they created, and then they get angry at trees, or they get afraid of them. Oh no, if a storm comes, it may topple over. Yeah, okay, but why cut down the tree? And if you do, then plant another. Usually people just cut them down and they don't plant anything new. They could just plant something so that, at least, but they don't want this. So what we should have is lots of trees in between the houses. We should have trees everywhere. Because the roof of each building is basically stone. The sun shines on it, it heats up the environment. All this heat accumulates and creates like a heat bubble that rises into the air and pushes away, potential clouds. So we have created deserts by turning everything into stone and sucking water out of our environment. For what? For sitting around looking at screens? Being miserable? So we can become so paranoid about our home that we have to install cameras that we then use during the day to observe what's going out on the streets? It's like, what, that's your reality? That's the way you're living? And you're complaining about the neighbor that does it openly and watches out of the window? You see, you may not get what I'm saying, but you could if you listen to it. or if you had observed it. But the point is, we clearly need to change. That's the point. Now, once you start to focus more on what you actually are here to do, then it's becoming a bit clearer for you. But there are things you don't know. So fear is a huge obstacle to take responsibility in the world. Because now I started as a content creator, I don't want to stop. I don't want to do other jobs. Which is why I don't have the time to run around and play frisbee in the park anymore. I decide to be here and create content. Is that a form of running away? I believe it is my call for action. I don't have time to play frisbee. I don't have time even to slackline, although I loved slacklining. That is a sacrifice. That's a sacrifice I have made. Because I said, I don't want to be always drawn everywhere to do all these things. If somebody wants to slackline, go and slackline. I don't have to slackline. I go hiking. So I had to cut off certain branches of myself. But leave the trees alone. Unless it's growing into your window, I don't believe you have to do anything. So I stopped caring for practices like gardening. Why should I work in the garden? Why should I cut out what people call our weeds, if to me they ain't weeds? If to me they are, dandelion is one of the most powerful healing plants, probably. Anyway, let's get into this, okay? If you survive through this, that's a 40-minute introduction. I think you'll be okay. Okay, I'm not gonna read the preface, but it's the translation by Edwin Arnold, Sir Edwin Arnold. They happen to not be able to read Sanskrit, which is in a way sad, but if you know the emotional language, then I don't think you need to be able to read Sanskrit. You just have to understand the two sides and how they come together. Which gives everyone the chance to simply, practice. And say, oh wow, I don't have to do what others have done. I can do however it unfolds for me. Anyway, it starts with a dedication to India. So have I read this wonderful and spirit-thrilling speech by Krishna and Prince Arjun held, discoursing each with each. So it's a discourse between Krishna and Prince Arjun, which some call Arjuna. So have I writ its wisdom here, its hidden mystery, for England, O our India, as dear to me as she. So have I writ its wisdom here, its hidden mystery. Okay, it's a Sanskrit poem, so they call it, but the poetry is lost in the translation. Occurs as an episode of the Mahabharata in the 6th or Bhishma Parva of the great Hindu epic. It enjoys immense popularity and authority in India, where it is reckoned as one of the 5 jewels. So they give a lot of credit to it. I'm not going to read this because I'm not really interested in Edwin Arnold. I'm just interested in the Bhagavad Gita, which consists of 18 pages. But to me, it's something that was written a long time ago, and it has to be translated into modern times. You know, what is the Bhagavad Gita in relation to pornography? That's what is important. There's no use to read this like the Bible all the time. There's just no use. You just have to read it, integrate it, look at life, understand what's going on, and see yourself in the middle of it, asking, what can I do, right? What can I do? Do I want to be a part of it? Okay, we live in times where we have electricity and where tax exists. Okay, what does that mean about responsibility? Well, it means it's gonna be a tough ride, my friend. It's gonna be, okay, try to stay in the middle as much as you can. There's no use hating the state, because you have contributed to it. However much or little is in that sense also irrelevant. Now I'm going to attempt to read this in one day, so I've done it, and then I can move on. Chapter 1. Okay. Dhritarashtra speaks. Okay, if it says like Dhritarashtra and then a double point, I'm just gonna say speaks, okay? Dhritarashtra, it's a double point, I'm gonna say speaks. Or I just say the name, Dhritarashtra speaks. I'm gonna keep saying that. Ranged thus for battle on the sacred plain. Okay, ranged, it's gonna be, I'm just gonna read this sentence. On Kurukshetra, say Sanjaya, say what wrought my people and the Pandavas. Okay, now the question is, what are the Pandavas? You know, that's already how it starts. I have no, you know, I'm not into all of this. I have heard some of it, but what are the Pandavas, right? Because it's really also, it can be a bit confusing. Okay. A great battle, so maybe I should read the introduction. You see, so maybe the introduction to this video or this recording is really important. This famous and marvelous Sanskrit poem occurs as an episode of the Mahabharata in the 6th or Bhishma Parva of the great Hindu epic. So 6th Bhishma or Parva is a time span in what we may call history. It enjoys immense popularity and authority in India, where it is reckoned as one of the 5 jewels, Pancharatnani, of Devanagari literature. In plain but noble language, it unfolds a philosophical system which remains to this day the prevailing Brahmanic belief. Brahmanic, right? So it's a teaching, it's a guide, but the teaching is life. The Gita is not in the form of the book, the teaching. It's reading it, seeing it, and then letting life teach you. It's no use to keep on clinging to this book because your life is already the Gita. That's what I have come to understand. No, I don't read books like, that's it, that's the wisdom. No, life is gonna teach you this. That's how it's supposed to be. We're not supposed to sit around and just study books. We're supposed to do something with our lives. Okay. Because we need real true men, like back to the Viking age, but with some understanding of the world, right? Okay. To this day, the prevailing Brahmanic belief, blending as it does the doctrines of Kapila, Patanjali, and the Vedas. I believe that they are all kind of scriptures. So lofty are many of its declarations, so sublime its aspirations, so pure and tender its piety, that Schlegel, after his study of the poem, breaks forth into this outburst of delight and praise towards its unknown author. Magistrorum reverentia Brahmanis inter sancti blah blah. That's some Latin stuff, I don't know what that means. Lassen re-echoes this splendid tribute, and indeed so striking are some of the moralities here inculcated, and so close the parallelism ofttimes actually verbal between its teachings and those of the New Testament, that a controversy has arisen between pandits and missionaries on the point whether the author borrowed from Christian sources or the evangelists and apostles from him. Yeah, it's simply a poem, my friend. And unless we know who wrote the poem, what I'm saying is, let's think back a long time. Somebody writes a poem, but it's actually a story. Because who can say what Krishna is? It's a word. But how many use a word without having the connection or the feeling? So to me, that's more like nature. To me, what is Krishna to some people came to me in the form of a dolphin at the age of maybe 15 or 14. So while I was standing with my friends, they were talking. I have related this already more often. I'm just saying this is how spirit to me has talked, in the form of visions and usually through nature. So I feel connected to all kinds of natural beings, which is why it's hard to accept humans. Which is why this is just a poem. Life happens outside. In that sense, look at it. But if you cannot be harmonious, then you have to start cleansing. Well, if you would be clean already, you wouldn't listen to this. Ofttimes actually verbal. Between its teachings and those of the New Testament, okay, I already read this. This raises the question of its date, it's irrelevant, which cannot be positively settled. That's where people lose themselves in things that are of no consequence at all. Because the Gita itself, the book, will not change anything. You may walk around and say, I've read the Gita, I know a lot. Yeah, but what are you doing? Well, look at Ramdas. He studied all of this. He did all of these things. And in the end, he became, after all his training, he became fat and obese. And then he had a stroke. Okay, what do you know about energy flow? If you could have felt the blockage, you could have, So no wonder then, in the end, you kind of like get a stroke. I mean, you can really talk yourself into, there's still, this person that hasn't died, you just don't want to face it. Yeah, but he's gone, man. No, he isn't gone. He lives on through spirit. He talks to me. Yeah, but that may also just be your own mind making it up. I have made up stuff in my mind, but it wasn't real yet. So if somebody dies, they're gone. So you can keep them as something in your heart, like keep talking to them, but they're dead. So you have to look for the living. Who's alive, who's here, who lives where you are, that kind of stuff. This raises the question of its date. Like I said, it's irrelevant, which cannot be positively settled. It must have been inlaid into the ancient epic at a period later than that of the original Mahabharata. But Mr. Kasinath Telang has offered some fair arguments to prove its interior to the Christian era. The weight of evidence, however, tends to place its composition at about the 3rd century after Christ. Oh wow, I thought it was before. And perhaps there are really echoes in this Brahmanic poem of the lessons of Galilee and of the Syrian incarnation. So it's just what I believe. They already had all of this belief about the gods, and then somebody just wrote a poem and they're all like, yeah, awesome. So what it truly is it's basically just describing what they believed in already anyway. Right? So they're describing what they believed in anyway and just turn it into a poem. So somebody understood maybe what their belief system was, right? And then he just made it into a poem. But when it became famous or important, whether he still lived, it remains, who knows this? So we don't know the guy who wrote this. Was he doing his yoga? Or was he just drunk and, wrote this? Was he really a man of action? Or did he just write one poem? Or was he, what kind of a man was he? So there's no point to put an awful lot of importance onto this document. Because you can read Peter Pan and still find truth in it. You can read all kinds of books, and they're going to be a mirror of current times. Because if we look towards India, then India isn't anything glorious. They've got mass production, they've got, so we hear, a lot of pollution. They've got lots of people. They've got smartphones. They've got porn. They were corrupted alongside everyone else, although they have the Bhagavad Gita. And now we've got people here running around preaching the Gita. Sorry, what's the point? What are you doing? You're just running away. You're trying to be a recluse, but you're still handing out books. Which means a book needs material, which is why you're contributing to the system, but you're acting like, no, we're doing better. We're completely different. We're studying the Gita. Yeah, what for? This is not what you need. What you need is something that comes from today's times. You have to face reality, and that's what you're seeing when you leave the house. That's reality. And that's a fact. It's seen as the level country between the Yumna, that's the important part now, which is going to help us more in understanding this. It's seen as the level country between the Yumna and the Saraswati rivers, now Kurnul and Yend. Its simple plot consists of a dialogue held by Prince Arjuna, the brother of King Yudhishthira, the brother of the king, Yudhishthira, with Krishna, the supreme deity wearing the disguise of a charioteer. Okay. A great battle is impending between the armies of the Kauravas and Pandavas. So Pandavas is one side facing the Kauravas. And this conversation is maintained in a war chariot drawn up between the opposing hosts. So this is you in the middle, facing against left and right, against light and darkness. But what's light to darkness? What's darkness to light? These are just words. Black isn't better than white. which is why you have to bring it into the middle, and that's maybe where the battle emerges. Right? And that's then creation. The question is, do you want to stand in the middle of a battlefield and create war and dismemberment and do you want to create a lot of blood? Or do you want to say, hey, but we don't have to fight? No, because fights aren't really necessary. So, sorry, but before I go more into this, I just want to take this away in the front, because I know that the book is built in a way that Krishna, in the form of a charioteer, is talking to Arjuna and trying to tell him, this is your duty, you have to lead your army into battle against the other. Okay, but what if he doesn't do it? So to me, Krishna could also be like a serpent, trying to wiggle into Arjuna's mind, getting him to create war. But that's a lot of karma. So if you stand in the middle and you feel like I have to be in the middle, then you cannot lead one side against the other. Then you have to bring both sides together in a harmonious way, and that is true yoga. Which is why we're not gonna read the Gita as Ramdas read it, which is basically saying, hey, what the Gita says is Arjuna is supposed to, wage war against someone else, but he just doesn't want to do it, He's being told that that's his duty. But who's telling him that? We hear voices, we say that's this, but you don't know it. You gotta make the decisions, and you have to face the consequences. And that's then, being real, being here, being present, being in the middle, being in the now, snap judgments, that's Zen. If your heart says, why should I lead my family into war? You couldn't just work, next to each other. That's just what I'm saying. Like, if whether or not we fight each other, is dependent on me, then I can make a choice. And if I can see another way, then I can pursue it. You see, it's a bit different if you ever have heard any other perspective. That is the perspective that comes natural to me. I don't want to fight against, because that's really tedious. I want to fight for, right? For nature. But that means I just have to reduce my impact. But I'm still producing content. That's a controversy. But it's also darkness and light. That's how it is today. I'd like to contribute, so I'm doing this. But I'm not really, I'm not super aggressive about it. Okay, the poem has been turned into French. Okay, that is not interesting. There's little else to say. Okay, now we can start. We know now what the Pandavas are. I'm probably gonna forget this again. Okay, so Dhritarashtra speaketh. Ranged thus for battle on the sacred plain, on Kurukshetra, say Sanjaya, say what wrought my people and the Pandavas. Sanjaya speaketh. When he beheld the host of Pandavas, Raja Duryodhana to Drona drew and spake these words. Ah, Guru, see this line. I'm not gonna comment on all of this. I'm not super interested in all these names. I'm just gonna go to the points that I find important, otherwise this will really be long. Ah, Guru, see this line, how vast it is of Pandu fighting men, embattled by the sun. I'm probably gonna concentrate most on what Krishna says and what Arjuna asks, because the rest is just, it's not that. And the message of the, otherwise I'm gonna lose myself. You see how easy this is? You really have to focus, my friend. Pandu fighting men, embattled by the son of Drupada, thy scholar in the war. Therein stand ranked chiefs like Arjuna, like to Bhima chiefs, benders of bows. So now they're describing the hosts. Virata, Yuyudan, Drupada, eminent upon his car. Drishtaket, Shekitan, Kasi's stout lord, Purujit, Kunti boy, and Saivya, with Yudamanyu and Subhadra's child, and Drupadi's all famed, all mounted on their shining chariots. On our side too, thou best of Brahmans, see excellent chiefs, commanders of my line, whose names I joy to count. Thyself the first, then Bhishma, Karna, Kripa, fierce in fight, Vikana, Ashvataman, next to thee strong Somadati, with full many more valiant and tried, ready this day to die for me their king. Each with his weapon grasped, each skillful in the field, weakest meseems. Our battle shows where Bhishma holds command, and Bhima fronting him, something too strong. Have care, our captains, nigh to Bhishma's ranks, prepare what help they may, now blow my shell. So this is now the opposing side to Arjuna, I believe. But let's see, maybe it's just gonna become apparent. Then at the signal of the aged king, with blare to wake the blood, rolling around like to a lion's roar, the trumpeter blew the great conch, it's like a trumpet thing, and at the noise of it, trumpets and drums, cymbals and gongs, and horns burst into sudden clamor. As the blasts of loosened tempest, such the tumult seemed. Then might be seen upon their car of gold, yoked with white steeds, blowing their battle shells, Krishna the god. Yeah. Arjuna at his side. This is a bit like the Ramses thing, right? Like a god in the man, in the form of the man. God is just a word. Okay, you've got power, you've got energy, whatever. But nobody's immortal. You're gonna die, so... You know, a god, Krishna the god, but he's not everything. He's just Krishna. He can sit around and he can identify with oneness, but he's still a human. He still has a form. Oneness has no form in that sense. Well, it has, but it is ever-changing. But if Krishna always stands there and looks like Krishna, well, then what is he? Then he's more like a priest or something. I'm just saying, like, this is the way it needs to be seen. Arjuna at his side. So you can just see Krishna as an advisor. But that is basically Jafar to the Sultan. And look what happened to the kingdom, or what Jafar wanted. He just wanted more power. So if Krishna can get Arjuna to do what Krishna tells him to do, then Arjuna is just a puppet. So, who's Krishna? Krishna the god, Arjuna at his side. Krishna with knotted locks blew his great conch carved of the giant's bone. Arjuna blew Indra's loud gift, Bhima the terrible. Wolf-bellied Bhima blew a long reed conch, and Yudhishthira, Kunti's blameless son, winded a mighty shell, victory's voice, and Nakula blew shrill upon his conch named the sweet-sounding. They named their trumpets. Sahadev on his called gem-bedecked, and Kazi's prince on his. Sikandi on his car, Drishtadhyum, Virata, Satyaka, the unsubdued. It's already a bit like materialism, right? Giving too much credit to objects. You know, what today is your car was then your conch, you know? Today people spend all day, you know, and back then it was this. So I see all these objects here just as tools to do what I need to do, which is why you really need to declutter. Okay, they hadn't all this overproduction, you know, but they were awfully too fond of their conches, so they were identifying too much with their idea of war, and then they wanted to wage war. Sorry, I'm just like this. I'm really like this. If I'd be Arjuna, I would have said, well, fight each other if you want to. I'm not gonna lead this, you know? If it depends on me whether we're gonna have war, yeah, I'm just gonna go back, man. Sweet sounding, that's why I stayed out of the park and just went hiking instead, because it was too stupid. You know, I don't have to be there to fight some kind of a drug lord or a drug ring, you know, by being there where they are. I just go into nature, which is where I want to be, and then I simply take away my power, my energy, my attention, my consciousness from the area where drug dealers are. Because if I've got power and I go to where drug dealers are, then I attract more people to where drug dealers are. And I don't want to do that. So simply don't go there. You see, you have to learn to avoid each other in certain areas of your life, which they clearly didn't get. Okay. Sahadev on his call, I just don't like putting too much weight, saying, this is it. No, it isn't it, it's living it. Reading this will give you nothing. Knowing about this will only give you, you know, one more thing you have to consider. It's one perspective. It's just a story, man. Okay, awesome, you wrote a poem. Okay, can you cook? You know, could the guy cook? It doesn't say anything about diet in here, or does it? Well, it doesn't really help me with porn. It's just an escape, because porn is real, porn exists, and children are drowning in it. That's what we have to face. You know, facing the Gita, that's nothing. Go hiking at night, man. Yeah, you'll know what I'm talking about. That's the place I'm coming from. Okay. And yeah, it's just, I knew it would be like this. Sikandi on his car, Drishtadhyum, Virata, Satyaka, the unsubdued until now. Drupada with his sons, O Lord of Earth, long-armed Subhadra's children, all blew loud, so that the clangor shook their foemen's hearts with quaking earth and thundering heaven. Yeah. Then 'twas, it's just sometimes we shouldn't cling so much. Then 'twas beholding the Tirashtra's battle set, weapons unsheathing, bows drawn forth, The war instant to break Arjun, whose ensign badge was Hanuman the monkey, spake this thing to Krishna the divine, his charioteer: "Drive, dauntless one, to yonder open ground betwixt the armies. I would see more nigh these who will fight us, those we must slay today in war's arbitrament. For sure on bloodshed all are bent who throng this plain, obeying Dhritarashtra's sinful son." Yes, sinful son, okay. I'm just saying, you don't have to be the slayer. You don't have to really judge people. Judgment will be dealt by itself. Karma will happen. Energy has been built up by each of our actions. Even as a child, right? There are children who are more responsible than others. So now they want to turn Arjuna into hating the other side. I don't have to hate them. I have to acknowledge they exist, and then I have to ask myself, do I wish to mingle with them? Do I like their ways? Because you can also set boundaries without always going into war. But maybe some battles cannot be avoided if the opposing side refuses, to lay down their arms. But then it's also still a form of communication. I can communicate by taking up a sword. I can also communicate by going hiking and saying, hey, you fight your own battles, I'll fight mine. If this is becoming too toxic for all of us, yeah, maybe I'll just walk away. I don't know. It's a question, right? It's a choice. So Krishna, if he's taking sides, then how can he be God? God is both at the same time. So why would Krishna stand there and say, you have to do this? You see, my perspective is a little bit different. But I do accept that that's the problem now with dissociating. I'm in this position now where I'm being asked to do things which I would not like, which I don't wish to do. But the reality is that I'm using electricity to record this, and I cannot pretend that I'm just channeling it into the power plug. It's coming from somewhere else. Which means the spiritual path is clearly coming also with a lot of acceptance. There are things that are simply the way they are. People produce power. I plug something into the thing, and then there it is. It's just, for me, really hard. So I still don't really know what I have to do. And that's just super weird. I thought I knew. Now I'm not so sure anymore. Thus by Arjuna prayed, O Bharata, between the hosts that heavenly charioteer drove the bright car, reining its milk-white steeds where Bhishma led and Drona and their lord. See, spake he to Arjuna, where they stand, thy kindred of the Kurus, and the prince marked on each hand the kinsmen of his house, grandsires and sires, uncles and brothers and sons, cousins and sons-in-law, and nephews mixed with friends and honored elders, some this side, some that side ranged, and seeing those opposed, such kith grown enemies, Arjuna's heart melted with pity, while he uttered this. Arjuna, Krishna, as I behold, come here to shed their common blood. Also, Arjuna speaketh, because now it's not a double point. Krishna, as I behold, come here to shed their common blood. You concourse of our kin, my members fail, my tongue dries in my mouth, a shudder thrills my body, and my hair bristles with horror. From my weak hand slips Gandiv, the goodly bough. A fever burns my skin to parching. Hardly may I stand. The life within me seems to swim and faint. Nothing do I foresee save woe and wail. It is not good, O Keshav, naught of good can spring from mutual slaughter. Lo, I hate triumph and domination, wealth and ease, thus sadly won. Aho, what victory can bring delight? Govinda, what rich spoils could profit? What rule recompense? What span of life itself seems sweet? Bought with such blood, seeing that these stand here ready to die, for whose sake life was fair and pleasure pleased, and power grew precious. See, power grew precious. It's when you give too much importance to power. So he sees it all. He says power has become too precious. I wish to have power in the world as a manifest entity, so we can hold off this ignorant behavior. So yeah, I am trying to draw people to me, but I'm not sure what I must do to accomplish this. So that's my inner battle. No, there are people who want me to do things that I don't want to do. But I am still kind of dependent. So, Brothers and fathers-in-law and sons-in-law, elders and friends, shall I deal death on these even though they seek to slay us? Not one blow, O Madhusudan, will I strike to gain. The rule of all three worlds, then, how much less to seize an earthly kingdom? Killing these must breed but anguish, Krishna. If they be guilty, we shall grow guilty by their deaths. Their sins will light on us, if we shall slay those sons of Dhritarashtra and our kin. What peace could come of that, O Madhava? For if indeed, blinded by lust and wrath, these cannot see or will not see the sin of kingly lines overthrown and kinsmen slain, how should not we who see shun such a crime? We who perceive the guilt and feel the shame. O thou delight of men, Janardana! By overthrow of houses perisheth their sweet continuous household piety, and rites neglected, piety extinct. Enters impiety upon that home. Its women grow unwomaned, whence there spring mad passions, and the mingling up of castes, sending a hellward road that family, and whoso wrought its doom by wicked wrath. Okay, for anyone who doesn't know, castes are of course these society, different, I don't want to say, because what's middle class, what's lower class, it doesn't exist. People say there's lower castes, there's higher castes, but what's a higher caste to a lower caste? What's a higher caste without the lower caste? What's a lower caste to, without the higher caste? And what if you turn it around? So up is down. It's just a word, lower, higher, So what's higher to a mole? A mole is living underground. Okay. What's that to a, let's say, like a goat or something, like a mountain goat? You see, it's all the same thing. You can turn anything around. Fish swim in the ocean. Okay, but what's that to a bear? Okay, he feeds on it. Well, not from the ocean, maybe. Unless it's a polar bear, of course. But other than that, we talk about castes. It has to be seen as one thing where people try to distinguish. But if these things were fixed, then nobody of the so-called lowercase or the caste of this or that could, do something else. So just because you have been brought up into a working family who works, let's say, in the industry or something, doesn't mean you cannot be an author. So these things are kind of transitory. They're fluid. Everything changes. Nothing is fixed. One family shouldn't be confined to that's who you are. No, that's what we're doing. But actually, maybe it would be better to change. And then you can say, well, only if our environment lets us. No. Your environment won't let you change. You have to really change. And that's what I'm saying. Your environment won't come and say, you have to change. You look at your environment, you realize I feel terrible. That's not what I want to do with my life. I need to change. That's a personal choice. Now Arjuna sees all his family and kinship. He says, but I don't want to do this. Why should I do this? For what? Power? That's a reasonable thought. Well, if you cannot see, so there's no point. So I understand Arjuna. I see no point in fighting each other. Because if he's the one in power, then he doesn't have to do it. He can just let life continue. I'm really looking for my Rubik's Cube. I don't know where it is. I've kind of lost it. And it's making me sad. Because during times where I don't really feel like doing anything, I could just continue to learn, I hope I haven't thrown it away. Maybe I have put it away. Sometimes I'm a bit drastic. I don't know, some things happened. There seems to be a cloud over that area where the Rubik's Cube used to be. Yeah, I believe it should be somewhere. I probably put it into something. Or I lost it, and my life is saying, no more time for the Rubik's Cube. You have to be really active now. Yeah, okay, so if, let's say, your other side is really angry and says, we have to fight you, and you react to it, then you're doing their bidding. Why should you do that? It's like your neighbor that is bored and hates his life, and he wants to let it out on you. And then your neighbor gathers lots of people and tries to, fight you. And you say, oh, why should I fight against you? I can just let you, let you suffocate in your own anger. You see what I'm saying? I can just let you suffocate in your anger and just move on. So it's like the Spartans. Okay, they fought. They probably did good. Maybe they could have just taken all their people and said, okay, we're out of here. Sometimes you cannot run away. It's also just the times we're living in today. You cannot just take a sword and cut people down. So this is really people actually kind of want peace, but they want still war elsewhere. And we have the wars we have today are what I have told you about, you with your neighbor. These little, that's what I mean. Everybody turned into a real, weakling. People pride themselves for winning in lawsuits. right? Fighting a lawsuit against someone. They win with, I don't know, overpowering the cashier to get her to do something, like, could you give me, I want the cigarettes, give it to me. Wow, I feel so powerful, I've got money. Oh yeah, awesome, my friend. That means nothing. Can you hike for 30 kilometers? No, why should I? You see, that's how people are living today. It's like, why should I do anything? I'm just gonna go home and jack off, I'm just gonna go home, I'm just gonna smoke, Oh yeah, I'm just gonna drink Coke and rum and... Why should I be here and present and watch out for stuff? Yeah, why? Why should you be? Well, you have to choose this yourself. I would probably go into conversation. I would ask the people, where does the hatred come from? Why are you trying to fight with us, man? I don't want to fight you. So what do you want to say, I'd much rather live in harmony. Because otherwise, we're living in all this multi-culti stuff. I can now classify and I can say you're black, you're white, that's not my people, that's just then racism. In the end, everyone should have a chance. But I find it hard to communicate. So I also identify more with people who look a bit like me. So I cannot be here for everyone. And that's what Gandhi was facing. I'm just saying. Oh, are you gonna compare yourself to Gandhi now? Well, I have to compare myself to someone. And if I cannot find someone to compare myself with, because I have simply gone further with my mind than most people. Like, if I cannot compare myself to my father with certain things, then I also have to look for other inspirations or guidance. I'm just saying, that's just the way it is. Their sweet continuous household piety and rights neglected, piety extinct, enters impiety upon that home. Okay, that I have already read. Sending a hell, okay. Nay, and the souls of honored, he sees consequences. Nay, and the souls of honored ancestors fall from their place of peace, being bereft of funeral cakes and the one death water. So teach our holy hymns. Thus, if we slay kinsfolk and friends for love of earthly power, Ahovat, what an evil fault it were. Better I deem it, if my kinsmen strike, to face them weaponless, and bare my breast to shaft and spear, than answer blow with blow. So speaking in the face of those two hosts, Arjuna sank upon his chariot seat, and let fall bow and arrows, sick and hard. Here endeth chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita, entitled Arjun Vishat, or the Book of the Distress of Arjuna. Okay, this was actually alright. They're fairly short chapters, which is why if I elaborate on each chapter a little, I think it's good. So I think I can sympathize clearly with this position. Only if he's a man of action and he's being pressured into action, then he must choose what to do. So instead of giving up and he can let his weapons fall, but he can still be a missionary. He can still communicate. Well, if it were at all possible. In certain ways, I find communication impossible, because if your spirit is angry and you're acting accordingly, then you're just gonna see me as an enemy until you, let's say, stop drinking coffee and smoking alcohol. Because, as long as you continue to do these things, you're still gonna be angry. And then you're gonna try to use me either as your weapon or as your enemy. But I want to be neither. I just want to live my life as harmonious as I can. And if I want my life to take shape, then I have to give it a direction. So if Arjuna says, I don't want to sacrifice the way we're living because it's actually good, so I cannot do this because I love what we do. I don't want to be responsible for destroying it. But now the situation today is quite different. Because what I see is nature, what I love, the natural way of things, natural law. Basically what happens to a certain degree by itself without man trying to overpower everything. So this has already been infringed upon. So Mordor, we're not at the point anymore where, Mordor or the outskirts of the war, well, it is in the end then Saruman, right? It's a spoiler, who takes over the Shire, tries to take it over. We're not at the point where we can say it's super easy to get rid of Mordor. No, Mordor is already a fixed part of most formerly natural areas. It has already all been taken over. And even the hobbits, which I count myself to, or the wizards, have started using the tools of Mordor. Because there's just too much Mordor. And now we have to talk to the orcs, or to the elves that were raised by the orcs, which are basically just crippled souls, which are children that came out of times of war, or times of the industrialized world, which means we're all toxic, we're all crippled beings because we stopped going into nature, because we started producing food that is just for the masses, which clearly lacks in quality. So we no longer eat acorns in the forest, because when we eat it, we start to feel uneasy and we think it makes us sick. Yeah, because it starts to cleanse you, my friend. There's a lot of bitter in acorns. You see what I'm saying? I'm already past the point where I can say I don't want to fight, because the opposing force has already taken over. We're already surrounded. We're not just facing another side anymore. This thing has already grown into us. Our very being has been taken over. So it's not this clash of war, it's more like an infiltration by ignorance. So if consciousness is battling unconsciousness, if this is the two forces also in yourself, the wish to be unconscious and then the greed to be conscious. You can be greedy for consciousness because consciousness seems a bit like power. And that's not the problem you have as an individual, the black and the white. So the reason why they want to fight is probably because they either just want to take over the land and have more power, that's just the visionary side, or it's because of everything that happened in the past couple of years, all these little battles between people, and now they just want to test their strength. So that's the thing about yoga. You open your channels, you open your chakras, you go hiking barefoot, you do Paidala Jin, right? It's like slapping and pulling. So it's a mixture of introducing stress to your body, it's to open your channels, it's to harden yourself up. You hold your planks, you do your breath work, like breathe deep into the stomach, hold it. And suddenly you start feeling power, energy flowing. Well, what are you gonna channel it into? Into content or into war? That's a good question. Right, so if I go to the park, I have a lot of energy flowing around me, you know. Because I've opened a lot of my channels, I go hiking barefoot. But if I go to the park, then I know who's gonna be there. People who smoke tobacco, people who smoke all kinds of things. Energy suckers. I have seen them already, I have been there for years. And still now it's trying to pull me back in. Still now it's trying to pull me back into the park, so I go there and slackline. I'm not here to slackline any longer. So I believe I possibly have to throw it away. I choose to go hiking. Why do I choose to go hiking? Because when we are hiking 30 kilometers, then you cannot smoke or drink alcohol, not at the pace I'm going, because you're gonna be left behind. And if you don't want to be left behind, well then you better join hiking. Because if you smoke and drink alcohol, you're gonna be left behind. Okay, so now Arjuna is in this position, but you are in your own position. I mean, if you're listening to me, who's a guy who goes in nature a lot, regularly, you know, not like for days on end, but that's gonna change. That's my goal for the future. So I also have to hold my ground at the moment. You know, I have to keep doing this. And I simply choose to do this, because it's the best thing I can do at the moment. Unless my life comes and takes it all away. Okay. But maybe I also can do a transition. You see, at the moment I don't quite know. It's really hard. The boundaries that I was trying to set up, it seems like they're starting to mingle. But any transition that I allow to come into my life, so war is not a transition, that's a breaking, that's a clashing, that's a tearing apart, that's a trying to disintegrate something. It's creative, but what does it create? It creates trauma, it creates broken children. Do we need this? Just because it happens often, or that history is known for also its violent episodes, why do we have to copy this? I mean, I don't have to participate in warfare. I can just say, okay, if you all want to fight, then I go and fast. And maybe that's what I should really be doing. But if I go and fast, then how can I lead people into nature? I have tried doing everything on an empty stomach. It usually is like this, that every time I try to do this, I run out of stamina. And then I start eating again. Otherwise, I just fly away. And that's my problem. I know I could leave, and it would be super easy, but maybe it's better to take shape, to be here. I want to eat, I want to cook, I want to create space for people, I want to bring people together. And the world I see demands me to earn money, which means then probably you have to pay tax. So no matter how much, you know, how big your mind gets, it's still, in reality, you're just this small guy. You know, you're just one speck of potential light with darkness, and that's your shadow. So the more you go into nature and hike, the more also your shadow grows. Which means the more lightful you become, the bigger the shadow that you cast. Because you still need a form. You're a person, you're an individual, there's things that you've done. You cannot ignore that you've done them. So life is also about often realizing how you've lived until now and then trying to do a better job. If I have an awesome mind and I can bring stuff together and I can communicate things that came to us from the past, I can translate it into the now. You see what I'm saying? then I think I can render a service to humanity. But do I have to sign in? Do I have to be a part of the system? You know, how far can I stretch boundaries? Is my environment going to accept me as some kind of a deity who brings great knowledge? Is my environment going to protect me for the services I render? If I say I cannot participate in Germany, right, as a German, I have to be a bit like distanced. But if one thing leads to another, then when are you in the pool, right? Well, I think there are certain things which I have to accept. I'm alone. There's nobody. I still have a father, you know. The way it seems like he's paying my apartment, I try to think that the apartment is paid by life or something. I try to take my father out of the equation, that's the truth. Because of the way our life has been going and because I simply do not cope well in this society. Amongst other people, I don't like their way of life. I don't like and I don't want to support this way of life, this running around, shaking hands. A handshake is a soul contract. Whose hands are you shaking? Are you shaking the hands of people that masturbate, that have pornographic images on their phones? Well, no wonder you're dirty and you feel miserable. I mean, you go hiking a lot in bare feet, you stop shaking hands because your handshake, right, there's more power. So unless there's an equally powerful man, I cannot shake his hand. But maybe I have to accept that in this society I needed help to grow and prosper. I'm just afraid that because I'm now in a situation, I was being told you have to live in this apartment. You're gonna, do you want this apartment? I said yes. And now I have this apartment. Who's paying it? Is spirit paying it or is my father paying it? Or is my father the form of spirit? Have I manifested this by myself? That's what I felt like. So I don't see clearly. I'm not quite sure anymore what's going on about this kind of a topic. But I'm being asked to, so I think the relationship with my father to me is more important than, let's say, with my neighbors, because there was a time where I had this spare key. And first my father had it, but then I needed it once, and then I gave it to my neighbor. My father has been asking it back. Now yesterday he wanted to give me money so I would make copies of the key. I refused the money, and when I hiked back, I thought, I'm just gonna ignore the request. But the diplomatic solution is, I think I'll rather work on the relationship with my father because I know him longer and there's more emotional stuff involved. And if I act like my father isn't actually real, so in a way I also had to give in some ways. So it's better to choose than love. So instead of choosing the other side that wants to fight, it's better to choose the ones that you wish to keep alive. So you gotta protect them from harm. Which means if Arjuna is in a position where he can, also make a choice here, then I believe he can choose to simply say, hey, we have to find a diplomatic solution. Right? We have to find a diplomatic solution. Another example out of my life is that I'm living now in this house, and I was asked some time ago to maintain the garden. And I started, and there's also women living here, but they don't do shit. They just sit around. Well, they do whatever they want, but they're all in a bad state. You know, they have hip problems, they smoke, they drink alcohol, and they drink way too much coffee, and they don't move. So I think they should do, you know, if it would be better if they do the garden work. So for some time I did the gardening, and then I wanted to build a compost. And there's one neighbor who lives right on the level of the garden, the ground floor, has a veranda also facing the garden. She saw that I was building a compost, and then she started to oppose me. She said, "We're not doing this. You're not getting a compost here." But I built it anyway. And then suddenly everything kind of backfired. And then my father came and he said, you know, somebody called him, you know, they don't want a compost here. And then everything clashed and the compost was taken away. And I simply said, I'm not gonna do garden work anymore. If I want to have nature, I'll go into the forest. Now I'm again facing this peace or war. Well, if the other side feels so miserable because they're just drinking coffee all the time and they're just sitting around looking at their phones, I cannot change this. I cannot help these people because they refuse to give in. They want to fight battles till their dying days. Well, then fight them. You know, it's gonna tear you apart. But I'm not gonna go into the garden where I know you're gonna approach me again, because I know how it's gonna go. You're gonna try to get information from me. So in the time where I'm not gardening, which I believe to be a useless occupation because nature is already gardening, then what can I do? In the time where I'm not gardening, I can write books. So I had to, that's what my feeling says, I had to sacrifice certain things. So you have to sometimes see where things are clashing. I will have to let my life show me what's going to happen. I believe that if I make the garden look nice for people that I believe to be lazy, then they think everything's fine. But I'm not. I'm more like a warrior type of guy. And to me, the garden is more like, I wanted to turn the garden into nature. So I rather wish to save the forest than to, you know, cut the lawn. Because I don't want to cut the lawn, these women want it. Why? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? Because a cut lawn doesn't have flowers, doesn't have fodder for bees. And if cutting the lawn comes in, you know, with the package of your neighbor observing you, yeah, I don't want that. I don't want to feed people who try to manipulate me. So why should you face a host of angry people, you know, by leading the people you actually like against them? This is like the mirror, right? I mean, you don't have to be totally impassive. You can be a little bit intimidating. You can just show, hey, you know, I don't think I want to fight you. So a better thing would be to just tell people to be strong. To also find pride in just maintaining your family household instead of running around trying to wage war. So we can learn to be balanced. And if yoga is about balance, then the message of the Bhagavad Gita cannot be that we should fight each other. But yeah, humans get more and more. Well, does that mean we cannot populate the land? Why are so many areas, why can't we just live harmoniously? Well, if we want to, then we have to learn it, because what we see today is that if each of us is our own spirit, the quality of each spirit has diminished. So we have now things like the mob, which, if you take it all together, I would say that 100 people living today amount to one real person. Everyone with their all shaking hands, running around, hugging each other, even amongst men. It's all merged into each other. That's also transgender. They don't know anymore if they're a man or a woman. They're all within each other. So you need to basically seclude yourself for long periods of time and take out everyone else so that you are who you are. Now, in terms of family, I find this a little bit hard. So giving into this with the key and giving into this with living here and being, but my life doesn't seem to prosper in certain ways. So I believe there are things that I may have to do. I just have to hold my ground. So the lesson I learned from the garden was, it wasn't worth fighting against one old, angry, miserable woman. Right? I don't have to face you. And I don't want to work to keep you alive, because to me you're not worth maintaining. And people usually don't do well if they're being, rejected. So either you start changing or you start to shrivel away. Some people should rather leave. But if I give you attention, you're gonna rise again. I don't want this. I have no more words for you, old woman, because you're toxic. So I have to let you go. And that's a hard choice. But I cannot get myself to let go of my family, or my mother or my father, because that would be really ungrateful. And that's where we have to choose, right? So I cannot stand around being worried about what I do here. I just have to do it. And then I have to let go of certain other things. I don't know, that's how I see it at the moment. I just have to hold my own ground. And then focus on every Saturday I need to go hiking. And that's for me something that can prosper, because it can build community. I don't want to, I think women then should stick together. I'm not here to be the pet of women. I'm here to also do my own thing. And just because I give my father the key doesn't mean I have to do everything anyone says, I can still be as reluctant as I was before to take up anything else. Which means that if then my life says, okay, we'll take away this apartment, okay, then I'll just live in nature. Because I'm not gonna live here like everyone else. I'm just refusing to do this. Which then poses on my parents the question, okay, how are you gonna deal with this? You're middle class, you have earned money. Instead of being selfish with the money and using it for, let's say, just whatever you want, you can finance your son in spreading truth or some transcendental perspectives to the people, and to lead groups of people into nature and hike. So I'm learning bird calls, so that if people join me right? That I can also say to them, that's this bird, ornithology is nice. Learn to distinguish